don't know how many of you recognize the wonderful tunes that Avi picks to complement the theme when he's doing the offertory, but that was Free to Be You and Me, which could not be better suited to my message this morning, and which also evokes some wonderful childhood memories, so I thank you for that. I don't quote scripture from up here very often, as many of you have probably noticed, but today is the first Sunday of Advent. In the Christian calendar, it's the beginning of the time when people prepare for Christmas, for the coming of Jesus. It's a time of year that's rich in symbols and metaphors, and two of those symbols have been standing out for me in recent weeks and weaving themselves together in my mind. First is the image of Mary preparing to give birth. And the second is the whole idea of bringing gifts, as the Magi do later in the story. For this morning, I ask you, if you can, to set aside the theological trappings that go along with this story. Don't worry about whether it's true or not. That isn't the point. Instead, I ask you to look at it as a powerful and beautiful myth, where Jesus and Mary become metaphors in which we can see glimpses of our own lives and our own experiences. I think that's what religious stories always do at their best, offer us glimpses into our own experience. If you're familiar with Jungian psychology, think of them as archetypes. The story speaks to a much wider human experience than a literal interpretation might suggest. Now, for many Christians, and certainly the ones I spend most of my time with, the Christian story is not understood as a literal story. Well, sure, we assume Jesus actually got born somewhere along the way. That part is probably literal. But the stories about the angels and the star and the shepherds and the wise ones, those are just the poetic flourishes that make sure people keep telling the story. Because what the story is really about, at least for me, is the incredible potential for hope and love and justice and peace to be born into the world, sometimes in very small and unlikely beginnings. And Jesus becomes the symbol of those things. And each year when we prepare for Christmas, we're reminded that we have to do our part. Metaphorically speaking, as the saying goes, it doesn't do any good to say that Christ, or love, or peace, or justice was born in Bethlehem if we're not also giving birth to those things here and now in our own time and place. So Advent becomes a time to be a little more intentional about reflecting on our own gifts, the gifts that we might bring to birth in this world. A time not only to shop for material gifts for the people we love, and I love to do that, so don't think I'm saying material gifts are bad. I think material gifts are great. I like giving them and I like getting them. But they're not the only gifts that matter. We also need to think about the intangible gifts that we carry within us. What lies within you? What lies within each of us? What precious and worthy gifts, what seeds of love or joy or peace or justice are waiting to be brought forth from within us? I've been sitting with those questions a lot lately. And oddly enough, I've been finding a great deal of meaning in the story of the Annunciation, the coming of the angel to Mary. It's not a story I've ever really related to before, probably because I don't believe it ever happened, so I didn't see much point in spending a lot of time with it. I still don't believe it happened, but I've come to see that there's a way in which it's true. And suddenly this year it feels very powerful, and I have found myself with a profound sense of envy for Mary. First, though, before I get to the envy, I find myself feeling really sorry for Mary. Can you imagine what it would have been like to receive this kind of news? Young, unmarried woman, in her time and place, finding out she was going to bear a child? I mean, first there's the sheer surprise of it, the bursting in of an angel who tells you you're pregnant. Any of you who have ever learned that you were going to bear a child may remember some of that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a baby. There's that element of shock just to begin with, but for Mary, the potential of shame with an out-of-wedlock birth in her culture. How is she supposed to break the news to Joseph, for heaven's sakes? And of course, the baby about which the angel tells her may not be the baby she had always dreamed of having one day. Sure, there may be a lot of honor in being the mother of God, but there's a lot of heartbreak, too. Think about how the story turns out. How could any mother bear that? So I really feel for Mary. Although in the story, the way the story is told, she's totally unflappable, which I also find amazing. She doesn't kick and fuss. She doesn't say, oh, don't be ridiculous. She doesn't say, why me? Couldn't somebody else do this job? She asks one question, just for clarity, how can this be since I'm a virgin? She gets her answer, which she seems to accept, even though it makes little sense to me. And then basically she says, okay, whatever you say, I'm game. So I admire her willingness, but I would not have wanted to receive the message that she received. But the reason I envy Mary is that she got a message. She got a message from an angel. This unequivocal, absolute declaration that the gift she was carrying within her was abundantly worthy. Wouldn't we all love to have someone assure us that the gifts we carry within ourselves are abundantly worthy? Don't we each need an annunciation in our lives? Because I believe that each of us does carry within us profound and holy gifts, gifts that the world needs. And I also believe that we spend a lot of time and energy, that we often waste a lot of time and energy, trying to give birth to gifts that are not ours, trying to bear someone else's gift because we don't think our own are good enough, or they're not the ones that we should have, or because we'd rather have some other set of gifts than the one we've got. So we try to be something else. I'm frequently startled by the way that once I start thinking about a theme, I bump into things that relate to that theme everywhere I go and everywhere I look. And yesterday, while I was looking for something completely different, I discovered a reflection by a colleague of mine named David Blanchard, who I've never even met. David wrote this: "On sabbatical in East Africa, I heard a story of a people who believe that we are each created with our own song. Their tradition is, as a community, is to honor that song by singing it as welcome when a child is born, as comfort when the child is ill, in celebration when the child marries, and in affirmation and love when death comes. Most of us were not welcomed into the world that way. Few of us seem to know our own song." Then he says it takes a while for many of us to figure out which is our song and which is the song that others would like us to sing. Some of us are slow learners. It is good to know our songs by heart for those lonely times when the world is not singing them back to us. That's usually a good time to start humming to yourself, that song that is most your own. They can be heard as songs of love or of longing, of encouragement or of comfort, songs of struggle or of security, but most of all, they are the songs of life, giving testimony to what has been, giving praise for all we're given, giving hope for all we strive for, giving voice to the great mystery that carries each of us in and out of this world. Well, I find this image of each of us having our own song, a very beautiful one. Maybe because singing is so deeply necessary for me. I can't get through a day without singing in some form or other. Rob and Laura will attest to that. When they saw me rocking out in the car as I pulled into the parking lot this morning, they could hear the music booming out of my car. I was singing along at the top of my lungs to a male a cappella vocal group singing sacred music, and it just keeps me going. So this idea of having my own song, uniquely my own, that I could learn by heart, that I could sing to myself when the world isn't singing it back to me, what a comforting image. I love the thought of each of us having our own song. You have your own song, the essence of who you are, your own unique gift to the world. Are you singing it? Or are you trying to sing something else and wondering why it's not coming out quite right? As my colleague David reminds us, we need to figure out which is our song and which is the song that others would like us to sing. If you're like me, you're susceptible to those expectations that other people bring. Those people who want you to sing someone else's song or offer someone else's gifts rather than the ones that are truly yours. Like the ugly duckling, though, who knew that he could not learn to lay eggs or to purr. We need to pay attention to what our own gifts really are. And that's why I love the story of Rabbi Zusia. It's such a great reminder that we're only asked to be who we are. Now, that's not the same as saying that anything goes and that we don't have to make an effort, that we don't have a responsibility to use our gifts well. We are asked to be the best of who we are, and that can be very hard work. But still, we're asked to be the best of who we are, not the best of who someone else thinks we should be or who we think we should be. The example that brings this home to me most vividly, and I hope you'll indulge me because it's a very personal example, is my father. My father wanted to be an actor. That was his passion. That was the gift that he wanted to bring to the world. And the trouble was, that wasn't his gift. He wasn't a bad actor. He did some acting. He was okay. He wasn't great. He might have been able to scratch out some kind of living at it. I don't know. He tried long enough to make himself pretty unhappy, I think. But before I was born, he somehow found a way to recognize his real gift, which was as a director, directing other actors. It was not the gift he would have chosen. He had spent a fair amount of time and energy trying to bring to birth the gift that he wished was his, the gift of acting, before he decided to embrace and work with his real gift. But once he did, that gift blossomed. It wasn't the gift that put him in the limelight and made him a star and had people all over the world admiring him and knowing his name. Most people have never heard of him. He worked for a small amateur community theater in York, Pennsylvania for nearly 30 years. He was hired by that dying little community theater in York, and he built it up into one of the best community theaters on the East Coast. And in the process, he changed a lot of people's lives. He brought together people who would never have come together otherwise. He drew out of them gifts they didn't know they had. He got them interacting and working together in ways they didn't know they were capable of. Through recognizing eventually the worth of his own gift, he allowed people the opportunity to recognize the worth of their gifts. And I'm not sure he ever completely let go of his regret that his gift hadn't been different. But at least he reached the point of accepting the gift that he had to bring, understanding how valuable it was, and giving it everything that he had. I said it wasn't the gift that he would have chosen. The fact is, for the most part, when it comes to what gifts we have or don't have, we don't have a whole lot of choice. We can develop what we've got, but an awful lot of who we are is just innate to our being. And so when we spend a lot of time and energy trying to turn it into something else, it can do us a lot of harm and cause us a lot of grief. I've come to believe we're much better off if we can just learn to love and work with what we've got. And not only are we better off, but the world is better off. Howard Thurman, the great African-American preacher and theologian and civil rights leader, once said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And that actually brings me back full circle to Mary and to the Annunciation, that angelic visit that assured her that what she carried was holy and good. So often the message we get from the world, not on purpose, but the message we get, whether it's from our parents, why can't you be more like your brother? Or from our teachers, why can't you stop daydreaming? or wherever we run into those "why aren't you different than you are" messages. The message we get is that we would be better if we were different, if we could change who we were. When do we get our annunciation? Where's my angel? I want my angel. I want Gabriel. I want Gabriel to come and point to me and say, "The gifts which you carry are holy and good. Bring them willingly into the world." And I think that I would then, like Mary, say, "Okay, that's what I should do. I'll do it." But who does that for us? Who assures us that our gifts are good and worthy, and that the world will be better off if we truly come alive as the people we really are? Obviously, my answer is we do it for each other. I remember when I was in second grade, I had an imaginary elf. I almost brought a little elf with me, but he was so small I didn't think you'd be able to see him very well. Anyway, my elf's name was Elphus. And at that point, I had never heard of Elvis. I was only in second grade. This was not an intentional pun. He was an elf. His name was Elphus. And he lived in my desk at school, and I would go through my science textbook and pretend to pick the fruit in the pictures and put it in my desk so he would have it to eat. I mean, I took this guy seriously. I was responsible for him. I would make sure he got some of my lunch. He'd go with me in my pocket to the cafeteria, and I would put, not real food, I'd pretend to take food off my plate, put it in my pocket for Elphus. I spent a lot of time in second grade taking care of Elphus, time that was probably supposed to be spent doing other things that you're supposed to do in second grade when you're sitting at your desk, time that I probably should have been paying more attention to Miss Long, my second grade teacher. And somewhere along the way, I must have told Miss Long about Elphus, although I don't remember doing it. But at the end of the year, and I think she waited because she didn't want to risk, the teacher's pet kind of thing in the middle of the year when I might then think I was special. She waited till the year was over and it wouldn't have any impact on my relationship with her or the class. We were going our separate ways. She gave me a box, and in it were 3 little ceramic elves, dark green with little red caps, delicate little things, not clumsy, heavy, cutesy ones, but very delicate, almost elegant little elves. She could have tried to convince me not to let my imagination run away with me. She could have told me that I needed to learn how to keep my mind on my work and not be silly. And instead, she provided this tiny little annunciation in my life. She was my little angel. She said, "Your imagination and your whimsy are good gifts." And I wanted to quote to you from a letter this morning, but I couldn't find the letter. It was a letter written from one member of the search committee that hired my father to another member. The one who wrote the letter was trying to convince the other member of the search committee that even though the theater was almost out of money, and in fact, seriously in debt, even though my dad was young and relatively inexperienced, even though they really couldn't afford to hire this new director, that was exactly what they needed to do. And Hallett Hammett was so convinced of my father's gift and its worth, and he wrote to his colleague, "Bert is our man. I know it." It gives me chills. I don't know when, if ever, my father saw that letter. It was in a folder of materials from the theater that eventually came to my mother, nearly 30 years after Dad's death. But it filled me with joy when I read it, because that was Dad's annunciation. That was the voice of the angel who wrote down a blessing and mailed it off. "Your gifts are worthy. Bring them into the world." So as we enter into this Advent season, whatever that means for you, I invite you, if you wish, into a time of exploration and reflection. In this season that is so filled with singing, are you singing your own song? In this season that is so filled with images of angels, can you recognize the angels along your path who have affirmed your gifts, even in small or silly ways? In this season that is so full of gifts, are you willing to give your gifts to the world, to come alive in a world that needs the best of who you are? And finally, can you be the angel, bringing the good news to someone who needs it, that they too carry within them gifts worth giving, a song worth singing, that they too should come alive in a world that needs them? May we all be Mary. May we all be Zusia. May we all be the ugly duckling. And may we all be the angel Gabriel.